one thinks about it, that most of those who are reactive conservatives typically favour free market economics.
Lecture 6,
and don't
Conservatism,
lay responsibility
Part
for any
1.
of the problems with which they're concerned on the operations of a capitalist society. Although one might know Pat Buchanan and those people who've been
Ladies and
attracted to his
gentlemen,
line as, in a sense,
our concern
moving
in this
from
course so
these sorts
far
of social
has
values
largely
to
been
criticism of
with
some of the
liberalism.
corresponding economic
In a
values.
way, actually, this is fitting because liberalism
is,
has
I
been
think one
so
must say,
influential in the United
in
States
addition to the
and in
appeal of these
other
things at
Western
popular level,
countries.
also popular,
But
also
as the
policy
lectures
analysis and various
continued,
other kinds of
conservatives
writing
might
which
have
serves
got
to back it up
increasingly restive.
on things
That's
here
to
of
say,
the writings,
apart
say, of
from a
Charles
few
Murray and
criticisms
William
that were
Bennett,
voiced from
and in
their
politics, the
perspective,
approach of
we
Newt
really haven't
Gingrich,
heard
which in a
from
sense
them.
was making
And
a pitch
indeed,
for much the same
conservatives could well say
constituency.
that the one self-avowed conservative to whom I've referred in the lectures, when back in the second lecture I talked about the dinner table, the entrepreneur there, while introduced as someone who referred to herself as conservative, was quickly claimed instead for classical liberalism.
Are important as an
Were there,
intellectual
they might
group, and they've
say,
influenced public
no
policy
real
in the US in some
conservatives
significant
at the
ways.
dinner table.
They include such people as
Actually,
Irving Kristol
if
and
the dinner
Patrick
table had been
Moynihan,
big enough,
and a number
there
of
could well have
figures
been four
associated with the
conservatives there of
intellectual
different
journal
kinds.
commentary.
First of all, there may have been
briefly.
someone, say,
They
who
were
got
really
a
a group of
PhD in
urban
political
intellectuals.
theory from
Historically,
the University
they were
of
typically in
Chicago,
their earlier
and who
days
was
welfare
currently
liberals,
working
who then gradually
in Washington,
became
D.C. as a
critical of
policy
the impact
advisor
of government
at a
initiatives
conservative
and so
think
on.
tank.
For example, trying to address poverty.
Second, there was someone who went into
They
the
became
military
convinced,
and perhaps was a former
sociologically,
neighbour
as it
of
were,
mine
of the
from the northern
importance of
Virginia
values and
suburbs
traditions
who'd
in
been
social
working
life.
at the Pentagon.
By this I mean that
Next,
they
there was
thought
someone
that
from a
just as a matter of
smaller
how
city
society
or even a
worked,
large town
more
in the
emphasis
south.
needed to be
He
placed
was an
on
evangelical
values and
Christian.
traditions. Thus, they
While the fourth
reacted against
person
some aspects of the
lives
welfare,
in Portland, Oregon,
liberal
and
social
makes a living
policy.
of a kind as
Well,
a community
some
activist,
seem to be in
and
agreement
would
with
be very
conservatives. However, there
surprised
were,
to
I
hear
think, three
herself
significant
described
differences.
as a
First of all,
conservative,
while
but she
they may
is
have
in ways that I'll
opposed
explain
certain
later.
interventionist forms of government policy,
Conservatism
they were
is in fact
typically in
a rather
favour
difficult
of the
topic
basic
to
idea
address,
of the welfare
as
state.
what's meant
It's more
by
they
the
wanted
term
things
can
to be
differ
run
really quite
somehow
radically.
rather differently. They wanted a different
Historically,
theory of the welfare
conservatism,
state,
for example,
rather
as
than
it
getting
developed
rid of
in
the
Britain
idea
and in certain
altogether.
other European
Second,
countries,
while
had
they
quite a
saw the
distinctive
importance
character,
of values,
which I'll explain.
their insight
But
was,
in more
I guess you could
recent
say,
times,
more sociological
ideas referred to
than
as
moral or
conservative have
religious.
taken
That's to say,
really
it
rather
wasn't
different
that they had
paths.
particularly strong
One
moral or
of these
religious
involves a
commitment
kind of
themselves. It was more
hard-headed,
as social
realistic
theorists,
pragmatism
they said a
about
society
politics,
works
one which
better
sees
when
the
there are
interests
good
of the state
values
and the
good
country as coming
traditions
first,
within it.
and an
Their perspective was
opposition
that values
to
and good
any idea
traditions
that
were
we
good
should assess
for
institutions or
individual
people's
society,
behaviour
rather than that
in
they
the light
were
of
in
their
themselves something
compliance
that was
with
correct.
abstract issues about
Third,
rights.
they were hostile
A second
to those
kind
who
of
favoured
approach,
economic
which one will find to
liberalism, and especially to those
referred to as
classical liberals
conservative,
who didn't address
involved
the
by way
issues
of
of morality
contrast
in
an
the kind of way
explicit
that they thought was
championing
necessary.
of moral ideals,
Let
and
me
indeed
turn
the
now
view that
to
problems
the
of politics
last
are
category
essentially
of
and at bottom
influence of conservative
moral
ideas.
problems. So if there's
This, I
any
think, is
problem or
something that's really
difficulty,
rather contentious,
the idea
but it's
there is
quite
one should
important and rather
find the
interesting.
moral solution. One should diagnose
Some
the
of
moral
what goes by
failing
the
that's
name
responsible,
conservatism in the
because
US
that will give us the
doesn't really
key to
have
things.
all that much to do
Third,
with
and this
older
indeed may
conservative
sound very
ideas.
strange,
Rather, as I indicated,
is
it looks like a
actually
kind of
often
combination of
influential
classical
upon
liberal
people
economic
who'd see
ideas
themselves
and a
as
few
politically
traditional
on the
religious
left.
values thrust into it. Sometimes
It centres
the critics
around
might
an
say,
upholding of
only in the rhetoric.
community
I mean, I
and
wouldn't
its
want to make a
importance
judgment here about Ronald
against
Reagan,
what is seen
but
as the
certainly
too
some people have
abstract
said,
and
well,
individualistic
the
character
conservatism
of
there was more in the
liberalism
rhetoric than
and of the
in
kind of
reality.
commercial society within which we're
It's
currently
striking,
living.
however, that by way of
All
contrast with
this,
this, some
particularly if you
conservative
put all these
ideas have
things
been
together,
taken
may
up
seem
by
a bit
people
bizarre
on
or
the
strange, and you may
of the
wonder
political
how these
spectrum.
very
People
different
otherwise
things
who would be either
relate
classified as
to a
welfare
single
liberals,
approach,
or even in
conservatism.
some ways who might be
To see this,
socialists
I
in
think,
their
it will
sentiments.
be useful that I say
What do I have in
something
mind?
about
Let me offer
British
some
conservatism,
examples.
because
First
this,
of all,
in a
there's
sense,
the idea
is the
that's
place where a
sometimes
number
referred
of
to
these
as
ideas developed, and also to say a little bit about its history.
How does this
and I'm going to
relate to
concentrate on
conservatism? Well,
that
some
in this
early
lecture,
conservative
and I'm going to
critics of
turn
liberalism
to other
stressed two themes.
concerns
First of all,
relating
the
to
notion that
conservatism
liberalism
in
was
the second lecture on
destructive of
conservatism.
community.
Let me then
And
start
also
off
that liberals
to
failed to
introduce
understand
what, in a sense,
that
is a
people's
largely
identities were
British
tied up
conservatism.
with membership of
It starts
different
historically
specific communities.
with a reaction
And what one
against
has
attempts
found
to
is
reform
that
and to
in
modernise
recent
the
years,
state,
some
say
of these
particularly in
very
France
criticisms
in the 18th
have
century
been
and in
revived by
criticism of the
people
French
who more often referred to as communitarian.
Well, during the 18th century,
This is a movement that
various
operates
people
both
were
at an
wanting to
academic
try
level,
to rationalize and
books about
modernize
this,
the state,
but also at the level of
some
the
other
community
people stood up
activists.
for the older
What is
institutions
striking is
and
that such
what in their view were the
communitarians are
distinctive
typically
liberties
not
that they involved.
conservative
They
in
saw
terms
this
of their
move
politics,
to rationalize
but
the
they have
state and to
certainly
modernize
taken
the state
up these
as in some
early
ways rather
conservative themes
sinister,
and made a
as
big
involving
deal
a
of it.
concentration of power
There
and
is,
an
though, a kind of
undermining of
practical
various
problem,
kinds
I
of
think,
traditional liberties.
which
It's
their
in this
views
context
face,
that you get set
which
out
is that if
some
you say,
ideas
right,
that
there
then
should be a
crop up
positive
later
political program
within
in the
conservative
US
thought.
to favour
A
community,
second and
we
key,
face the difficulty in the US
development
that there is such
in early
diversity
conservatism
that it's
comes
difficult
with
to know
Edmund
what
Burke,
values are to
who
be
lived
picked
from,
out and given special forms of
1729
support,
to
because by and large,
1797,
what one lot of people
and
want in one
his
area will be
writings
quite the
against
opposite
the
of what
French
other people
Revolution
want in
and
another
its
area.
supporters.
And so it's tricky
He
for someone who
emphasized in
wants to
this
support
context
community
the value
to find anything
of
that can be done at a
existing
general
institutions
level
as
appropriate
incorporating
to government
knowledge
policy.
that's been gained slowly
next
over
group
time.
who
Some
one
you
can
wouldn't want to
include in this
sweep away.
context are
And in
the
his thinking, he was in many ways
We'll
influenced
discuss in a couple
by
of lectures
the example of
environmental
common
issues
law,
and their
something
relation
which
to
in a
political
sense is
ideas
based
a
on
bit later
particular
and in more
individual
depth.
cases and builds
But
up
it's
over
worth
time.
noting
And he had this
that
kind
some
of picture
early
in
conservatives were
mind
somewhat
in
critical
terms
of
of the
economic
value
growth
of
and
older
critical of
inherited,
industrialization.
gradually acquired
And they were worried
institutions.
also
He
about
also
the
stressed
social
the
impact of
importance
economic
in politics
growth.
of custom.
There's a sense in
and
which
habit,
this has
and
been
what we call
revived.
prejudice. I guess
to
in
say
modern
some
terms, people may say
environmentalists and
gut
some say
feelings
objectors to globalization
against
are
abstract
in an odd
ideals
way
as a
and from
guide
the
to
left,
conduct in
echoing
politics.
various
Basically, what he wanted to
conservative
say is
themes.
trying
They
to
may
run things on the
also
basis
now
of
be concerned about
abstractions
economic
doesn't really
growth
work.
and its social
Rather,
impact.
it's important to
And
pay
you may
attention
too
to custom
also find
and
a
habit
positive
and to the way in
appraisal
which
being
this
given
fits
to
people
the tacit
to make
knowledge and
particular kinds
know-how
of
of
institutions
peasants and
work.
so on.
He also wanted to
opposed to the
stress that
theoretical
all
expertise
societies
of academics and political advisors and people who are
further,
flown
that just
here
because
and there
something
by
is
the United
imperfect
Nations to
doesn't
modernize
mean
things.
that we can
And so in this
necessarily
odd way from the
attain a
left,
better
you've got
alternative.
again a picking up
We may
of
really just be
certain
stuck with things that
kinds
are
of
imperfect,
conservative
and
themes.
attempts at reform may simply
Third
lead us
twist in
to
this
things which
area
are worse.
relates to feminists. Again, we'll
He
be
was
discussing feminist
particularly well
ideas
known
in
for
more
the fact
detail rather later.
that he was
in
an
the course of
early
lectures.
critic of the French
But some
Revolution.
strands
The French
within
Revolution in its
feminism raise
early
points
stages
that have
was
also been
supported
made
by
by conservatives.
most progressive public opinion
Kind
of
of
the day.
concern
Burke
about
said, I think this is going to
liberalism,
lead to
a concern
disaster,
about,
and indeed it did, and his
images
ideas really got quite a
drawn
fillip
from
as a result of that.
the world of business and
Burke
so on being
himself
made kind of
had
compulsory
really
for
favoured
everybody.
Adam Smith's
And there
style
have indeed
economics.
also
he
been
pointed
some limited
Smith as being the one
political
person on
alliances.
economics
For
who he really
example,
agreed
on the
with.
topic of
But
pornography,
in the late
between some
18th
quite
century and into
radical
the 19th
feminists on
century,
one side
there came on the part of
and
many conservatives a
on the other,
reaction
local
against markets
conservative
and industrialization.
We'll
Indeed,
look
in this
again at
context,
this issue
some
in a later
conservatives
lecture.
took up the
In
ideas
all
from
of
Adam
these
Smith, which we
cases,
talked about in
while
the second
ideas
lecture, his
may well have been
misgivings
taken from the
about the
conservative
advanced
tradition,
division
they're
of labour,
typically
the bad effects that
coupled
this was
with
having on people,
sentiments
and
and
they
political
painted really a
behaviour
rather
which is far
grim
removed
picture
from
of
conservatism,
industrialization
much more
and development.
associated with the left.
What
I think
kind
if one's
of view
interested in seeing
of politics
what the
really
impact of
comes out
conservative
of all of
thought
this?
is, it's important to bear
Let
in
me
mind
first of all
this
say a little bit
particular
about
connection.
conservative ideals.
Let me
It's a little
draw this
difficult
lecture
to talk
to
in
an
these
end,
terms about
and
conservatism
let me
because
just
conservatives are often
recapitulate
somewhat
briefly
reticent
what
about
we've been up
speaking
to.
in abstract
In this
and
lecture,
general
we
terms.
looked at
But I think you can
contemporary
really say the following.
conservatism.
Conservatives
After some brief
first
historical
often
introduction,
favour traditional
I considered what I
and
called
quite often
intellectual
religious
conservatism.
morality. They take
And
the
indeed
view
certain
further
tensions within
that the
I
government
then
should
described
foster it.
briefly
And this contrast
two
with
different
liberalism's
versions
view
of what
about
I
the
called
proper
reactive
neutrality
conservatism
of the
That's to
state
say,
on
the
matters to
sense
do
in
with
which
religion.
it seems to me many
For
people who are
conservative
conservatives
religion
in the
and traditional
US
morality
today
is very
aren't
much a good
conservatives
thing. It's
because
important
of a
for
prime
people, it's important for
attachment to
society. So
intellectual
why,
ideas
they
so
say,
much as
should we expect the government to be
reacting
neutral
to rather
between it and
different
other things?
features of their own social
Second,
lives
they stress that
and
we
what's been
need
happening
to
them
actively
in the world in which they're
maintain a
living.
social order that
I
they
looked
see as
briefly
being
at
rather fragile.
neoconservatives,
And in particular,
and then I
they're
concluded by
concerned
looking briefly
that
at
some
a strange
of our
but
human
rather
passions
interesting
and appetites and
development,
so on
namely,
need
the
to
way
be
in
tamed,
which
need
some
to be
conservative
restricted
ideas
if society is
have been
going to
taken
work.
up by
And you may
people
here
on
find
the
conservative
left of
writers
contemporary
referring
politics.
to the Christian doctrine of the fall of man.
You may
to this
feel
notion
at this
that
point
human
that
beings are
been kind of interesting,
and in
but
ways
a
that can be
little
dangerous if they're not,
so
in
the
some
next
sense,
lecture, what
kept
I'm going
under
to do is to
control.
look at things in a rather
Conservatives
more concrete
also
way,
typically believe
comparing
that
and
different
contrasting
countries
how the
have and
different
indeed should
elements
have
within mainstream
different
politics
traditions
approach
and
rather more
institutions
practical
and
issues
liberties, and that they
in
do
social
things and
policy
should
today.
do things in rather different ways.
Thus, conservatives don't share what is sometimes referred to as the universalism of liberalism and of socialism. The